Hello, and welcome to the new and improved revised edition of Anchor Watch with Bobby Jones. I am your humble host, Bobby Jones, and I cannot tell you how humbled I am by the support that you have shown me, my team, and Lincoln Square in general. The need for independent thought, independent journalism, independent reaction has been made very much apparent the last few weeks in particular. So, what we are going to endeavor to do here is to give you the truth, give you facts, give you historical context, and based on historical context, present actions, what we can see moving forward in the future and why you should care. The international news of the United States deploying tactical nukes back to the United Kingdom. That is significant. First of all, let me explain to you what a tactical nuke is. It's no different from a nuclear weapon of quote regular size. It's just a lower yield rate, and so the blast radius is supposed to be smaller. Going back to the beginning of the Cold War, when we unlocked the atomic bomb and all this capability, the United States and the Soviet Union, along with the future nuclear powers of the world, envisioned warfare where nukes would be used on a regular basis. That conventional warfare would indeed include nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, during the Cuba Missile Crisis, the first thing that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Curtis LeMay, wanted to do, he said, nuke Cuba. Let that marinate for a second. So that is where these things came to pass. They were constructed and they've been maintained ever since. Now, no tactical nukes have really been constructed since the 90s, since different treaties have come in. But the deployment of tactical nukes is in response to Russia, who basically threatened tactical nukes during the height of this Ukrainian war because Ukraine was kicking their ass. And so to look like he was the alpha, Putin let the world know he's not afraid to use tactical nukes. Well, the United States has, returned the favor in kind and are now sending tactical nukes to the United Kingdom for the first time since 2008. Now, I say the first time since 2008 because we had them there on the European continent, and the UK was like the only country that agreed to take them. And we've used that as a nuclear deterrence ever since. Um, we took them back, and if you notice that year, 2008, certain administration came into power in 2009, the Obama administration, and diplomacy led the way. No need to deploy these things now because we have a current administration that believes might makes right and primacy will win wars. We're redeploying them. This is the type of thing that when historians try to put things together after a war, they will look at this as an escalation. Make no mistake, this is an escalation, and it's dragging in not just the United States, but other countries as well, which leads me to my next point internationally. NATO has been told by the United States, by actually the United States European Command, the four-star in charge of all of Europe for the United States military, that they must be ready for a two-front war. One front with Russia, one front with China. Now, let me give you historical context on this. The United States is the only country in modern history, and I mean modern, to successfully execute a two front war, and that was during World War II. And that was after getting our butts handed to us for the first few months of that war. A two front war for any country is highly dangerous. It could actually have you depleted to the point where your country will no longer exist. The Soviet Union was barraging them and basically had to ignore Japan and tried to just be peaceful with Japan because they could not afford a two front war. Okay. NATO, who, by the way, NATO's entire existence is to avoid a world war and a multi front war. Okay. That's why this alliance is there right after World War II. For the United States to tell NATO to be prepared for a two front war is a game changer. Why? Because even back during the Obama administration, our philosophy on war fighting for the United States by ourselves changed. We went away from the two front war concept to now looking at one country, limited area conflicts. That happened under the Obama administration during the global war on terrorism. I know because I had to execute it. Now we're not only talking about the United States being in a two front war, we're now talking about the United States and all of our closest allies prepping for a two front war. So the scenario that plays out, for example, would be Russia continuing to push into Eastern Europe. And while everybody is focused on that, China then goes and invades Taiwan. That is the scenario that creates fear across the world, because at that point the jig is up. NATO and other alliances around the world are going to have to pick sides. That would lead to World War III, which, going back to the original story I just talked about, tactical nukes going to the UK, that's not a good thing for those who want peace. Now, along the lines of escalation, let's talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu and his recent actions in Gaza and Syria. If you can recall the F-bomb heard around the world, where the president was on the White House lawn getting ready to fly off to the G7 summit, he said famously that Iran and Israel, quote, don't know what the fuck they're doing, unquote. Okay. Well, the ceasefire that was supposed to have happened, that broke and led to him being mad, has been held in place between Iran and Israel for the meantime. But at the same time, Israel has struck against Yemen, they have struck against Syria, and they continue to pound Gaza. Now, understand, the White House is alarmed by this, to the point where even this administration, the Trump administration, does not understand the behavior. You can see the quote there, a madman or a child who doesn't want to behave. And that is because, to be honest, the United States has been getting played. The Trump administration in particular has been getting played. The involvement of the U.S. airstrikes, the lack of respect for the ceasefires, and now you're seeing literally the image of the Gaza church being bombed and, multiple people killed, children injured. Syria, hotels hit, reporters reporting, and they're watching bombs blow up behind them. The rhyme or reason for the government of Israel's actions have not been made clear, and it's obvious they are not in line with the United States. But he's been doing this for a while. As you can see, the clip we have on the board now, Biden has been saying this about Netanyahu privately, because at the end of the day, Biden, Obama, Bush, they are all worried about the United States getting pulled into a regional conflict that could escalate into something more. Which is why when the airstrikes happened, with the B-2 bombers, etc., that whole thing, this is why people like me were concerned, because it's seen as an escalation in the region overall, in the overall region. And the problem with that is, if you do that, if you escalate, you have to have an off ramp. And I don't know of anybody that can tell me right now what that off ramp looks like. Speaking of ego and speaking of escalation, the Trump administration and Elon Musk are not getting along. And the escalation is now at the point where President Trump has ordered the evaluation of all of Elon Musk's contracts with the United States. Why is this significant? Well, because the United States has bought into Elon Musk for quite a while. From Starlink to SpaceX, taking our astronauts up, we have invested heavily into Elon Musk. A lot of that wealth that he likes to brag about comes from the United States coffers. And Trump knows that. But the fact is, Elon is mad at the legislation that just got passed, the One Big Beautiful Bill, which gutted electrical vehicles, among other things, renewable energies. These are things that Elon Musk has actually invested in. And on top of that, Elon saying that Trump is in the Epstein files and then trying to start a third party. is seen as a direct slap in the face. Now, does Musk care? Right now, he probably doesn't. But the question is, if Trump's ego abruptly cuts off Musk's contract, Ukraine will suffer because of Starlink. The United States will suffer because of Starlink. SpaceX, all of these things, there will be a ripple effect felt throughout the American government and our allies that no one can tell us how they'll make up for it instantaneously. The ego thing here is real, but those that will suffer will be us, servicemen and women, Ukrainians, Europe. It will be wide ranging. So I'm not saying I hope they make up, but I do hope rational thought comes into play on how to wean themselves off of Mr. Musk. And then finally, in a much lighter note, oh boy, Donald Trump is doing his best to continue to throw all sorts, and I mean all sorts of distractions in the air. He wants the NFL franchise in Washington, currently called the Commanders, to change their name back to the Redskins. Now, for those who may not know a damn thing about American football, the Redskins, historically, that name has historically been seen as racist. There have been many Native American tribes, indigenous tribes to the United States that have said they hated the name. And don't get me wrong, you'll find a few that think they like it. But overall, it's been seen as a slander. So they finally changed it. Trump, who famously could not buy his way into the NFL and started his own league that failed, the USFL, he has basically said, change the name back because it's iconic, et cetera, et cetera. The problem with that is Trump couldn't even tell you 3 players on the team. Okay. My dad played in the NFL, and it's hard to know who Washington's players are, with the exception of Jaden Daniels right now. Okay. He doesn't care. He knows the NFL moves the needle. He knows that some of the land they want to build this new stadium on, because they want to bring the stadium back to D.C., Washington, D.C., because it's currently in Maryland in the middle of nowhere. He knows that can move the needle, and he needs a win. So he's going to try to strong arm the largest sports league financially in the world, the NFL, to change, because he needs the win. Elizabeth, do we have any allies left? Internationally, I would not use the word allies. I would use acquaintances and treaty obligated nations, because allyship goes beyond what's written on paper. It goes beyond defense budgets. It goes beyond weapons sold or weapons used. It's an unspoken bond that the countries have for each other, where they support themselves, especially in the military. And I'm telling you right now, none of our former allies look at the United States the same way. They don't. They may look at the individual service member that works with them, the individual businessman that goes there and says, okay, yeah, we trust you, we believe you, but we know that your boss does not care for us. And that's a significant problem. That's a real problem. And to be honest, the American people, with this America First mentality, which we did 100 years ago, we did it again. We did this 100 years ago. We don't realize what it means to be the leader of the world, historically speaking. That comes with accountability. That comes with responsibility. We have treaties with over 100 nations. 100 nations. We have trade with over 150 nations. And for us to back off of all of this because of, to be completely honest, jealousy and ego in many respects, because you want to be seen as someone greater than you are, undoing 80 years of consistent development with the rest of the world, no matter if it was a Republican or a Democrat. That's an issue. That's an issue. And so, we have acquaintances in my mind. We have treaty obligated acquaintances in our mind, but allies, that's a long way to go right now. And then the last piece that I want to talk about in this segment, the releasing of the MLK files. Now, I went live yesterday and I talked about this in detail. The reason I talked about it, because I was so outraged by it. I'm a born and raised Atlanta guy. Okay. I live right outside of Atlanta, grew up in this town, went to high school, all that. And when I retired after 26 years in the Navy, came right back to Atlanta. Okay. What I have a problem with is not the releasing of the MLK files. It is the manner in which it was released. The family did not want them released. Number one. Number two, the fact that it was used as what we say in the military chaff, something to deflect fire from Trump's own accountability, is low. It's low. And the assassination of Dr. King is something that, to be completely honest, the country, not just the African American community, the country has yet to still move on from. Because if you know anything about Dr. King's history, and trust me, I do, and I taught at his alma mater, Morehouse College, you've got to understand, one of the reasons the death threats became so high to Martin Luther King was because he just wasn't talking about civil rights for African Americans. He started talking about civil rights for everybody. He talked about the working wage of everybody, poor white farmers, immigrants that had came here, the unfair drafting of people during Vietnam. He touched on issues that affected all Americans, and people started to listen. Okay. The FBI ramped up their illegal intel collection on him and other civil rights leaders, anybody that they deemed a threat to the status quo. Well, the problem with that is the status quo at the time Dr. King was alive was Jim Crow segregated South. 100 years of it, from Andrew Johnson at the end of 1865 to literally the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts of 64 and 65. That's 100 years of second-class citizenship that was changing. And so Trump has this mentality, and I'm just going to be very blunt and say it very succinctly. He cannot stand successful Black people, period. He hates Barack Obama with the passion of 10,000 suns. Anytime he sees an African American, I mean, he's going after multiple people, Susan Rice. He cannot stand Kamala Harris. These people who are successful despite their skin tone has really, really irked him. And Barack Obama in particular, because he's cool, he's charming, he connects, he's everything Trump isn't. He goes after him. That's why he released that stupid AI video the other day about him being arrested in the White House. But the beginning of that, Genesis, that whole legacy started with Dr. King. And so he's like, let me try to smear the civil rights leader while people will stop talking about me and Jeffrey Epstein and the sex trafficking that it very much appears obvious that President Trump had some hand in participating in. That's what the evidence is showing us. And it's so overwhelming, and I'll leave it at this, that just before we came on the air, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, has said he's going to hold Congress out of session, so that no vote on Jeffrey Epstein's files can be brought by Congress, because the Democrats and some Republicans want this coming to light. Why would Mike Johnson do that? Because you're seeing bipartisan support for it. Why does he have to hold Congress out? If it was just a partisan issue, he could have Congress vote on it right now and it wouldn't pass. But he's just going to not have Congress convene. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to ask yourselves, why? Why? Well, that is the current events. If that's not enough for 1 week, I don't know what is. I really appreciate the support. Please, in the chat on our Substack, let us know if you have questions for next week. We're going to do our best to answer them for you. Until then, stay alert and stay anchored.